All right. Welcome in, guys. Chris Marler here from SDS, along with my former co-host and good friend, Connor O'Gara. Connor, how you doing, man?
I'm good. I'm hanging in there. I always tell myself I'm not going to overreact. Everything's going to be fine. We're going to
Yeah.
get through the first rankings. And then I say to myself afterwards, well, Connor, you just wrote 1,000 words about this and you have some thoughts.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I feel like last year I definitely overreacted. This year I didn't feel like I overreacted as much, but I wish there was one thing the committee would have overreacted. Let's get into the actual rankings themselves. And I was on a different show and I didn't have time to make the stupid logo, or what do you call it, graphic for it with the actual rankings, but just kind of going through them. 10 Ole Miss, which I thought was pretty cool. I'm not going to get outside the top 10 just because it's not as relevant. We'll talk about some of the matchups.
Wow. Shots fired at Mizzou. Jeez.
But still, I was just about to go there. The Mizzou, as you put out on Twitter, number 12 overall, which is the highest they've had in program history, right?
Highest in program history, indeed. Yeah, that I think has some significance for the Georgia side of this, the quality of wins, and also let's get let's get through the rest of the top 10, and then we'll do some takeaways.
So Ole Miss at 10, 9 was OU, 8 was Alabama, 7 was Texas, 6 was Oregon, 5 Washington, and then you get into the top 4, which are the ones that matter the most, even though it's only week 1. Number 4, Florida State. Number 3, Michigan. Number 2, Georgia. And number 1, Ohio State, which I think if you looked at some of the stuff, the history of the committee, it shouldn't have been that big of a surprise. That's where they were going to go. Right off the bat, your biggest takeaways from not just the top 10, but the top 25 and the rankings in general.
Yeah, I never get this right on the first time, and I had the top 6 nailed, which
awesome.
Does not happen. And it felt weird. It felt really weird to say, wait, I'm going to put Ohio State at 1. I'm going to put Georgia at 2 and Michigan at 3. Like, I'm really going to put Michigan at 3. But what the difference between, if you're looking at this between the selection poll and the AP poll, the AP poll you can look at and be like, yeah, they're probably a little bit too reactionary with some of this stuff, and like some of the way that teams drops and the way that this all plays out. If you just looked at last year, Tennessee was ranked number 1 in that first playoff poll, ahead of Georgia. Did not matter that Georgia was the defending national champ. Did not matter that Tennessee had not beat Georgia in 6 years at the time of that match, or at the time of that ranking. So for all of the Michigan fans saying, oh, well, we curb stomped Ohio State the last 2 years, I don't care. It doesn't matter. Like, that doesn't matter in this ranking, because if it did, then Georgia would be number 1, because Georgia's won 25 straight games. All right. Like, that's, so we know that's true. So I had no problem whatsoever with Ohio State at 1, Georgia at 2, and then Michigan at 3. How wide of a smile is too wide of a smile from Kirby Smart to be at number 2 and not number 1?
Loves it. And so here's the thing I thought was interesting about this year's ranking from the top 4 that you bring up, right? So I was off by 1. I thought they would put Michigan at 4 and Florida State at 3, because Florida State has the big win against LSU. Now, in my dumb head, I was like, well, they went on the road and beat Clemson. Clemson kind of sucks. So it's like, maybe that doesn't factor in as much. But then you look at Michigan's resume, and I thought about this, especially after you brought up the Tennessee thing from a year ago, because we all know that Georgia was a better team, especially looking back on hindsight being 2020, right? Georgia destroys Tennessee, but Tennessee comes into that week with 5 wins against ranked opponents, the number 1 offense in the country. I thought it was interesting that you had the committee, or the people at ESPN, not the committee, saying they asked all 4 guys that were a part of the show, Herb Street, McElroy, Booger McFarland, and Joey Galloway. All 4 of them had a different answer. And I think that when you look at the top 3, if I said Ohio State should be number 1 because Ohio State has the best resume out of the people in the top 4 or 5, I think that's, like, not up for debate. If you said Georgia was number 1 because Georgia's probably the best team in the country, especially after what we just saw last week, or defending national champs, or whatever you want to say, they haven't been knocked off yet, I think that is also a good point. If you want to tell me that Michigan, who's been the most dominant team in the country, is at number 1, I could see an argument for that. So it's like, it's the first week of the rankings, and I feel like you could make a case for several people, but I do feel like with the top, I would say top 10, really, or top 8, I think they got it right.
Yeah. The one, like I said, I don't have a problem with how they did 1 through 3. Maybe there's a question to be asked, like, should Florida State be ahead of Michigan? Because Florida State kind of quietly, everybody was talking about, oh, Boston College took you down on the wire. You know what Florida State's been doing for the last month is beating everybody by at least 3 scores. I know they were
Right.
down in that Duke game, so it didn't really feel like it because they were down 10 early, but they have stormed back and looked really good. And by the way, Boston College is probably a better team than people realize. They've won 4 consecutive games, so kind of take that for what it is. But I think it's interesting to see that the head-to-head, even with a pair of one-loss teams,
Yeah.
did not prove to be the ultimate difference maker when it came to ranking Texas and Oklahoma, a couple of future SEC teams. If I'm an Oklahoma fan, I'm kind of pissed. I'm kind of pissed. You beat them on a neutral. You beat them at a neutral site. You both have the one loss, and I get it. You can make a case that Texas winning in Tuscaloosa by double digits, maybe the best win in college football. That is the best argument in favor of Texas. If your argument as to why Oklahoma should have been below Texas is, well, the loss is so bad. Kansas is in the poll. Kansas is 21. They're 6-2. They're pretty. They're a good team. Lance, like this is a stale argument if that's the one that you're making. So like I agreed more so with McElroy when they talked about that on the ranking show as opposed to Herb Street, which I get it. You have to factor in the entire resume. And I'm just comparing the teams that had the same amount of losses. I think that's where it's more significant. Whereas like the Mizzou LSU thing, you know, Mizzou is ranked ahead of LSU despite the fact that Mizzou lost at home to LSU. But at the same time, it's like, all right, well, Mizzou is the one loss. LSU is the 2. So it's not the only thing on the resume. But I kind of like it more so when it's a deciding factor for teams that have the same amount of losses.
I almost like this idea of like a tier system with where it's at, where undefeated and then go to 1 loss and then go to 2 losses, because I think you're right. Like that is where it stops. Where it's like, yeah, I understand that LSU beat Mizzou and like the point differential is probably a little bit. It was way closer than how that game like looks on the scoreboard, you know.
What a backdoor cover that was for LSU, man. Well, that pick 6.
Down 22-7 too. No, but I will say too, like I could get Oklahoma's gripe. I could totally see that. It was interesting. It was interesting for a lot of reasons. And I think the FSU thing, it's funny because he brought up the Boston College game. I thought that was one of the most interesting comments that was made, because just strictly from the fact that we haven't heard anyone say that, right? Like, and I don't even know how long. But they beat Boston College in the red bandana game. And you're right. They have been giving them like a lot of grief for that close win for a while now. But
that's been held against him in the AP poll, but not in the selection. That's the difference of viewpoint that I'm talking about that I think is important.
Well, and FSU, when you look at too, like their resume, they have more wins against currently ranked opponents than Georgia and Michigan combined. Now, is that number 1 total? Yeah, it is. But still, that's more than Georgia and Michigan combined. I thought the other thing that was the most interesting, and I'll stay in the top 10, and I know that you and I both cover SEC stuff predominantly, but the Michigan thing being at 3, I think that they are one of the most dominant teams in the country. I was surprised even when I looked at today that their opponents' overall record is 31-33, which is not anywhere close to as bad as Georgia's. It's really not that bad at all. Half their teams that they've played have had winning records. But I thought it was interesting, and not saying right or wrong, but just interesting that the committee chairman said that they didn't factor in the sign stealing incident or allegations at all, and said it was an NCAA problem. No, and I don't even disagree with that. But I just thought it was interesting. They said that's an NCAA issue, not a CFP issue. Totally
separate entities. And I was talking about this with Will like probably close to a week ago.
Yeah.
And he was saying, how can the selection committee not factor that in if they have proof of cheating that happened in games this season? And my point is, they don't have to make that determination. They don't have to make that determination whether or not they want to listen to this ESPN reporter, that Yahoo reporter, this Sports Illustrated report.
Yeah.
All they have to do is wait for either the Big Ten or the NCAA to step in. And if they have some sort of sanction, then they can choose to abide by that. But until then, it's not really their job to figure it out. And I get this is going to turn into a Michigan against the world type season. It's already there. That point has been hammered home, and this number 3 ranking will only add credence to that. But it's still one of those things that I look at and I'm just like, all right, man, if another team, if Georgia were in that spot and Georgia had the exact same like lack of quality opponents, which look, I think Georgia beating Florida State the way that it did in a neutral site game, I think that probably helped them get pushed past Michigan, because I think that win is probably better than anything on Michigan's resume. But like Michigan fans would be irate if Georgia's got that kind of love. And I get it. Michigan has an average scoring margin against Power 5 competition of 39.6. I did my weekly breakdown of like all the 0 and 1 loss teams, and it's almost double the second place team, which is Oregon, at like 20.6 or something. That's like crazy. That. It's crazy. I mean, they have been so unbelievably dominant. But of course, is the competition, and that'll play itself out.
I honestly, I don't think my issue with Michigan is the fact that the 110th or 111th ranked strength of schedule right now. But like, it is kind of odd when you think about the fact that, okay, well, their best win, like on paper, it's a dream for me as somebody that loves to bash Michigan and the Big Ten. Like, their best win on paper is at Rutgers.
Home against Rutgers, at Minnesota.
Okay, right. And I don't think that, honestly, if we're being, I think Rutgers is a pretty good football team, to be honest. I think,
eligible.
Like, yeah, they're both eligible already, and UNLV is another win for them. I'm not going to count that in favor of Michigan, but like when I look at Georgia's schedule, and it's like, all right, your best wins are against 5-3 Florida and 5-3 Kentucky. Like, I think that those are kind of interchangeable, but for the sake of like argument and fun, and just needling the Michigan thing, I do think it's interesting. And you're right, but like maybe more so this year than ever, I do feel like it's so much clearer to see that this is all going to play out. Like, this is all going to play out because Ohio State and Michigan are going to play. Michigan has to play their 2 ranked opponents in 2 of the last 3 weeks of the season. Georgia's got to go through murderer's row over the next 3 weeks. I mean, like, thoughts on that?
You know what? Yeah, I kind of like that. This was not the first poll for the Danny Cannells of the world that believe this is all about brands and that certain conferences are favored over the others. Right. I thought they played it pretty fair. I think you could look at this and say, well, you got 2 Big Ten teams in the top 3. You have the first 1-loss team is from the Pac-12, the team that hasn't had a team in the college football playoff in 7 years. And then you look down the line, you're like, all right, well, Ole Miss didn't just get the benefit of the doubt because in the SEC, they're still ranked behind a bunch of 1-loss teams, multiple 1-loss teams from the Big 12. Mizzou is still sitting there at number 12. Like, it's not like they all of a sudden vaulted just because, oh my God, like Mizzou is this team that still has 1 loss going into November in the SEC. That's incredible. Like, their schedule is very backloaded still, in my opinion, but they do have the Kansas State win, which probably was what put them ahead of Louisville. How about this? So there are 13 teams that are Power 5 that have 1 or 0 losses. Marler, that's the top 13. They didn't put any 2-loss teams ahead of a 1-loss team. It's almost like the selection committee just said, you know what? We don't want to deal with that. We don't want to have to answer questions why we're ranking Notre Dame ahead of Mizzou or anything like that. And I don't hate that because it gives us a little bit of transparency.
I fully agree with you. I fully agree with you. Because that was one thing that we do, like, our podcast, we are supposed to be a little bit more national, which, as you know, you've known me forever. So it's like me making the switch to having to give like praise to the Big Ten, who's been like Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State are 3 top 10 worthy teams, in my opinion, right? Like, but it's hard for you.
Not Penn State, but
Penn State, that is it. Well, they almost lost your alma mater last week, which was bizarre in and of itself. But no, I think the thing this week, I remember seeing this from last year when people talk about SEC bias, and I would just kind of like beat my chest. The whole thing of like SEC is you've won however many last national championships, you've played in this many, and like the Heisman's, all these number 1 draft picks, and blah blah blah. And then you look at it and you're like, man, last year they had the highest 0-loss team, the highest 1-loss team, 2 and 3-loss teams in the final playoff going into bowl games. That is a little bit odd. So I think that this year, seeing what they put out there so far, I was fine with it. The only issue I had in the entire ranking, Connor, was USC at 20. I think USC it blows my mind they're still ranked.
USC's best wins, huh? That Arizona win is actually
DC.
Yeah, that's okay. All right, that's a little bit messed up. The Arizona win's aging better than I thought. That was my lock of the week. I'm on fire with lock of the week, by the way.
Really?
Absolutely on fire. Yeah. Arizona +3 against your Oregon State Beavs was my lock of the week. That was just knocked out of the park. I stayed up and watched all of it. It was great.
I did too, but I had Oregon State money line on that, like for our weekly picks. I need you to start doing the Texas beat hot take, because I started out really good with my Bama Texas pick, and ever since then it's been like, Ole Miss is going to beat Bama by 20. I don't think I've gotten one right since. It's been real bad. And that Florida pick last week was not good.
That was surprising from you. I didn't look. I've had people that we both respect in this industry who have said, "Is Marler a Georgia fan? Is he? Does he root for Georgia? So the word is out there, and
Yeah,
I know that I'm not alone. Many people listening to this are probably thinking, "Oh, I thought he was just a Georgia fan." So for
yeah,
you to go on the record, maybe it was just an emotional hedge. It was a
it was.
throwback, classic Marler emotional hedge to pick Florida.
I started talking, and it was like the Michael Scott thing. It's like sometimes I'll start a sentence, and I don't even know where it's gonna go.
Wait a
And
minute.
it,
Wait a minute. Wait. No. 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 You
oh yeah,
mean to tell me
uh-huh.
you did not have that plan? That just came out?
That came out organically in the middle of it. And here's the thing that really bothered me, Connor. Listen, we can talk about the hindsight because I don't think this is gonna have as many. Yeah, Willie Gray, he can attest to it. I I was I was sitting here and I was like, Georgia, I don't think at the time before the Florida game, I didn't think that they were the best team. And I was like, they're gonna lose one, right? And you look at the list of games they have coming up, and it's like, yeah, they could lose one. And just I said at the start of the video, Connor, there's nothing that Florida does that makes me think they're gonna win this game. There's just nothing. And then somehow I went from that statement into being like, Florida's gonna shock the world and win by 1 point. And buddy, let me just tell you, I was going through it on Twitter on Saturday, and all of it was deserved. All of it was deserved.
That's surprising. That is surprising coming from you. Look, we all whiff. This time last year, my big swing was Tennessee beating Georgia in
Hmm.
Athens. You were very much right on the money with that one. I was very, very off the money. Although I did feel a little bit validated by how good Tennessee was that I
Yeah,
said that in the preseason. I didn't feel
yeah, that's fair.
terrible about how Tennessee turned out to be. But for that day, yeah, I mean, you wear it. It is not our job to get every single pick right. Nobody in
Oh,
this business. Herb Street is still sitting there with like a goose egg in terms of the super dog standings on college
oh
game day.
God,
It's been rough. Even
yeah,
Stanford Steve's like getting 1 out of 3 right. Like he's no, even Tony Gwynn's got a better average than Stanford Steve. RIP. Um,
yeah.
but but yeah, so what I think is going to be fun to watch post rankings, you realize that by Saturday, Kirby will have convinced his entire team that Mizzou was ranked ahead of Georgia in the first
Hmm.
playoff poll, that Luther Burden didn't want to come to Georgia because he hated the vibes and just
Right.
said this place absolutely sucks, and he'll totally ignore the fact that he's from East St. Louis and he just wanted to stay home, and that also last year Mizzou actually beat Georgia.
Yeah.
Kirby will have his team convinced of all three of those things by the time number 12 Mizzou takes the field against number 2 Georgia. And there are some confident Mizzou fans that I have seen, and I'm just telling y'all to get ready. Get ready.
Vegas is not usually that wrong, and they have them as a 15-point favorite. So we'll see. But all right, last question I'm going to say to you, and we're going to have to do this every week. And I'm going to tell you right now because I know that you are a father now, and you got a bazillion things going on. I'm going to let you know. One, thank you for coming on. This has been a lot of fun. We'll do it each week after the show. Whichever week ESPN decides to do that BS college basketball doubleheader,
It's
where
next week, I think.
of course it is. I'm going to give you a break. You don't have to be here for that one because that is always
No,
like,
no, that's easier. That's
okay,
see, this is the and for parents of young children, you get what I'm
yeah,
saying. 7 o'clock is the worst time for this show. It is the worst time during the week to have that at 7 o'clock
right,
when that is right. Like for some people, maybe your kid sleeps by 7 or something like
yeah,
that. Maybe they can go down by 7. If that's you, that's great. We're not there yet. We're getting to the place where eventually that post daycare nap isn't going to exist, and
right.
we go into bed by around like 7:30 instead of like 8:30, which means that the routine is just late. So yeah, nobody really cares about that. But it's 7 o'clock. It's just it's not a good time. 8:30, 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
That I can work with a little bit more.
Okay. Because I remember last year's episode we were doing. I had like set up all like this stuff for it. And I was all excited, and you're like, "Hey, yeah, man, it looks good." I'm like, "Look at this graphic I made." And you're like, "Got it, awesome." And then it was like triple overtime or some ridiculousness going on in that basketball game. But all right, last thing I'm saying, we'll get out of here. Um, I don't want. I don't care how you do it. What you factor in. Give me your current prediction, if you don't mind, of your four that you think will be at the end of the year. I'll give you mine first, so you get a second to think about it. I think it's Georgia because I think they win the SEC, beating LSU. By the way, I still think LSU. I think LSU still has a chance to get in. I really do because we'll explain it some other time. But I just think that
Yeah, the Georgia Bama thing. Like if you
right,
beat Georgia and Bama in the regular season, yeah, pre-playoff, that 2017 Auburn is a
right.
reminder. That is the ultimate 2-loss point of entry for you. Yeah.
Completely agree. Completely agree. So I think Georgia is in. I think Ohio State. I'm just not willing to say that Michigan is going to be in there yet. I think Florida State. I don't think anyone in the ACC is going to get them. I don't think Florida's going to get them. So I think Florida State will make it. I think you're only going to have. I think you're going to have one from each conference. And I think that the other team that's going to make it, that might be the best team in the country, is going to be Oregon. And Oregon has looked really, really good as of late. And Bo Nix is not the Bo Nix that was playing when me and you were hosting the SDS pod, because he is like light years different now. In his 11th year as quarterback, he has really grown up.
Okay, I like that. I don't really have much of a problem with that. My national championship was Georgia and Ohio State, which again, like not bold or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sticking with both of those two teams getting in. I think Ohio State gets over the Michigan hurdle and stops that losing skid at 2. And then I think still I'm going to go with my preseason pick of Washington. Now, who knows? Maybe Oregon. What could happen is like last year with the Big 12, like a situation like that where maybe Washington gets through at 12-0 and they suffer that first loss to like a 2-loss Oregon team.
Yeah, that could happen.
And then Oregon wins the Pac-12, but Washington still gets in because they only have the 1 loss. Yeah. I could see that happening. I actually, that's what I think is going to end up playing out. And then Florida State is the easiest path to the playoff. The easiest path. Like if you're picking anybody today, and I think the playoff predictor that ESPN does, take that for what it is. It's kind of all over the place.
It's dumb.
Florida State, though, is sitting there with the most favorable path. And it's not just because the second tier of the ACC is kind of down. Mm-hmm. It's because of what they have already done and the fact that they're still undefeated. Now, if they had 1 loss, different story. Circle that game at Florida. I had that in the preseason as a Florida victory. That could be a Florida State loss in that one, but I still think Florida State's path is really, really favorable. And they're the team that I feel most confident about getting in of that group.
Yeah, that's fair. All right, man. Well, we ran longer than I told you we would. I apologize for that, but I appreciate you coming on. This is always good. We'll do it every Tuesday, whenever the rankings come out. And make sure you guys check out the SDS pod every Sunday and Wednesday.
Sunday and Thursday. Thursday. We record Wednesday, so Thursday, whatever. Same.
And then check out Saturday Football Uncensored as well. And we will talk to y'all next week.